Last year I made a video ranking every single game that I beat in 2020. Back then, it was easier to justify making a video like that because, you know, like many other people in America, I was stuck inside and unemployed for a little while. And even after I got a new and much better job in the summertime, it's not like I was busy going to the movies. Naturally, I used a fair amount of time playing video games. 2021 was a bit busier than the previous year for me, so there wasn't as much that I played. Plus, there were some games that I started playing, but I'm nowhere close to finishing them. Even so, I played enough new and older games to where I still wanted to make a video commemorating the best of gaming that I experienced in 2021. Before getting into my top 10 list though, I want to share my honorable mentions, the first of which is Golf with Your Friends. Man, this game is jank. It's not so glitchy to the point of being unplayable, but there certainly were frustrating moments due to how the game occasionally refused to function as intended. The worst of these egregious glitches was whenever we would accidentally hit a ball out of bounds, and then the ball wouldn't reset back onto the course even if it was impossible to get back on it. Despite that, I typically pack up my Switch and bring it over to my in-laws' house each Sunday, so we logged a lot of hours into this multiplayer mini-golf extravaganza. When it worked, we actually had plenty of fun with it. The gameplay is rather basic, but that just made for a relaxing, simple experience that us gamers of various skill could appreciate. Golf with Your Friends has been equal parts friendly competition and social experience for us all. Since there are still plenty of cosmetic items we have to unlock, we'll probably put a lot more time into it throughout 2022. My other honorable mention is the original Mass Effect game. 2021 brought about the legendary edition of the Mass Effect trilogy, and thus far I've only played through the original game. Thankfully, I enjoyed this game enough to want to play through the rest of the trilogy, so that should count for something. Becoming acquainted with a dense, new sci-fi universe can be quite daunting, but the well-written and performed dialogue, branching story paths, and overall narrative present in Mass Effect made my foray into this world a fun one indeed. It's no surprise that Amazon Prime is trying to develop a series based on this material, since BioWare created a rich, textured wealth of lore that I really enjoyed partaking in. In what feels like a ceremonious marriage between enacting intergalactic diplomacy and charting a course as a space warrior, Commander Shepard's debut adventure deserves its status as one of the more influential video game adventures of the past decade or so. The problem is, though, that the mission design and combat mechanics weren't quite up to the same level as the player-influenced storytelling. Working through story quests was fine, but I frankly got tired of seeing so many copied, pasted, and reskinned environments from one planet to the next, especially since you have to scale across many of them with this frickin' moon buggy thing. As someone who really enjoys playing through side quests in a sprawling adventure like this, it was disappointing to find that the game was padded by repeating the same kind of boring missions from one level to the next. Yet the quality of the main story, characters, and main campaign missions was still strong enough to have me positive on it overall. Given how much I've heard about the greatness of Mass Effect 2, I look forward to eventually playing through the rest of the trilogy. But now let's talk about what actually made the cut this year. Number 10! Now I'm starting things out with a slight cheat, so I'm setting a great precedent here. But I think in the case of the Little Nightmares games, it's appropriate to rank them together. They're very similar in terms of gameplay, aesthetic, and structure after all. Both are horror-themed platformers that integrate a lot of environmental puzzles and escape sequences. Think Limbo, but with a somewhat larger animation budget. The greatest strength of both titles is that the horror is derived from a non-stop aura of tension, which is punctuated by enemies that look absolutely grotesque. True to the title, the games make you feel powerless as you're escaping from one vile monster to the next. And when one of these monsters does catch you, it's almost always a disgustingly grim sight that I would hate for someone to actually go through. I appreciate that the developers went for more of that atmospheric type of terror, which comes from really suspenseful sequences of sneaking around enormous rooms, and the chillingly effective sound design. This combination of elements worked in concert to keep me on edge at all times when playing each game, which also made it fun for my wife to watch as a backseat gamer. If only the controls weren't so stiff and unresponsive in either title, for the games could have been much higher on the list if part of the terror didn't come from my fear of the controls working against me. Number 9! In all of the years I've spent with my in-laws thus far, one thing I've learned is that we love wacky, hilarious multiplayer games. Gang Beasts, the Jackbox Party Packs, Heave Ho, and now Ultimate Chicken Horse. This is arguably one of the most enjoyable among that bunch, which mainly comes from how much it encourages competitive gameplay. For those unfamiliar, Ultimate Chicken Horse is a pretty basic 2D platformer in theory. You just have to jump across platforms to get from one end of the map to the other. Where things get nutty is that each player is given a set of devious types of platforms and traps they can place on the map to make it tougher for everyone to get across. So, you might have to subject your adorable raccoon character to arrows, flaming tennis balls, buzzsaws, or other painful objects before you succeed in getting them to the end. When I describe it, the game probably sounds pretty mean-spirited and violent, but it's cutesy enough to where families could play together and really relish the fun. It's more Looney Tunes than Happy Tree Friends, if you get what I'm saying. For me, the game lost a little bit of its luster once we all spent enough time to unlock all of the levels and cosmetic items, but it's still really entertaining to play. Go pick this up if you want something different from your multiplayer, especially if you've been craving a chance to hang out with people in person. Number 8! Despite being my least favorite 3D Zelda game, Skyward Sword was still a pretty good time. Something that helps its case is that I really enjoyed the story. First and foremost, it's a big dump of lore that nicely sets up the events that come later on in the series timeline. It works well at establishing those details for longtime fans of the series, while newcomers may also find this to be a good entry point into the universe. Plus, the relationship shared between Link and Zelda is just so dang cute. I used to think that the Breath of the Wild Zelda was the best one, but now she has some stiff competition with the reincarnation of the goddess Hylia herself. Otherwise, a lot of the core gameplay is really fun, even if the developers made a lot of ridiculous choices with how they designed missions and structured the game out. Those low points and boring stretches of padding are made up by awesome dungeons, quirky side quests, a gorgeous art style, excellent music, and as mentioned earlier, a truly worthwhile story. It's made even better by the HD remaster on the Switch, bolstering a consistent 60 frames per second, while the button control scheme also works better than I could have ever hoped for. Feel free to check out my review if you want more of my detailed thoughts, but yeah, it's worth purchasing even at its high retail price. Number 7! The multiplayer for Halo Infinite is pretty fun, which I will talk about in a forthcoming video, but I'm shocked that for a AAA title that took 6 years to release, and yet still launched with a lackluster set of features, it's been surpassed for me personally by a free-to-play shooter from a small, independent developer in Nevada. That game happens to be Splitgate. I hardly ever play multiplayer games, but this is the first one in quite a while that I've enjoyed coming back to. It hasn't even made its way out of beta testing, and yet this is a fully featured multiplayer extravaganza, stocked with all of the modes you would want to play in an arena shooter. But more importantly, it's fun. Like, a ton of fun. The combination of Halo-styled gunplay and whipping across a map with portals elevates this into an experience that lives up to the old adage, easy to learn, difficult to master. And I think the game is designed upon that principle, since the matchmaking system is seemingly set up fairly, and the progression is also much more rewarding to the player than other similar games. It doesn't matter if you get a lot more assists than kills, if you contribute to your team, the game will reward you for it. And then of course, if you do master the wacky and maneuverability, the experience will be all the more thrilling for you. The only thing holding Splitgate back from greatness is that there is no split screen mode. But who knows, maybe 1047 Games will add that feature later on. They added Forge and Infection before Halo Infinite did, so there's no telling what might happen. You have nothing to lose except your time if you try this out, for it is free after all. I'm looking forward to playing many more matches with my friends in the future. Number 6! As I alluded to with my comments on Little Nightmares, bad controls can make or break a game for me. Sometimes a game can have clunky controls, but the artistic merit and entertainment value of the experience is enough to make up for that. Such is the case with the Shadow of the Colossus remake. Believe me, riding the horse Argo or climbing up the Colossi can be really aggravating at times. But in a way, it's part of the point. A major component of the story and gameplay is to make the player feel small in comparison to the environment around them. The sparse but nonetheless mesmerizing game world is properly scaled to where the player character is a bite-sized traveler roaming around enormous landscapes. On top of that, each encounter with the Colossus is a puzzle that requires wit rather than brawn to resolve. The cycle of seeking out all of these stone giants is one that I really came to enjoy. It certainly didn't overstay its welcome. The game was dramatic enough to provide epic thrills in large measure, but nothing was dragged out to where the experience lost its luster. Shadow of the Colossus is highly effective due to its simplicity, for the general lack of dialogue allows the story to stand out in what little lines there were, and then the visual storyline clues the viewer into the morality of their possibly not so righteous quest. Even if the act of climbing up a Colossus and bringing it down might be cumbersome at times, everything else makes the journey worthwhile. Number 5! Back in my high school years, one of the first games I owned for the Xbox 360 was Alan Wake. It may not have been perfect, but I love how it blended action-oriented gameplay with the storytelling of an episodic miniseries. Imagine my pleasure when a little over 10 years later, the remastered edition for the PS4 comes out, and I discover that I still have that same affinity for it all these years later. Sure, it may have some rather repetitive landscapes and enemy types, but I've always loved the clever twist on shooter gameplay, and that you can't just blast your enemies with lead, you also have to envelop them with light. Whether that be with flares, flashlights, or the headlights of a truck, the game gives you many different options for literally burning away darkness. But even then, I like that the character of Alan Wake is clearly a regular guy, but the gameplay isn't cumbersome in spite of his average qualities. Unlike some of the other games I previously mentioned, the tension of the scenario is definitely there, yet the controls are designed in favor of player comfortability. On top of everything though, Alan Wake is just a good, entertaining story. Anyone who enjoys the imaginative horrors of Stephen King's work or The Twilight Zone will feel right at home with the narrative presented here, which could have easily made for a cool TV show if someone adapted the material in such a way. Here's to hoping that the upcoming sequel will successfully build upon the awesomeness of the world Remedy created here. Number 4! I first attempted a playthrough of Bioshock Infinite back in 2013 when it first came out. I had really been loving my time with it and was at least halfway through the main campaign, but then my save file was corrupted to where the game would freeze each time I got to a certain point. And thus it was. I didn't touch this game again until my wife and I decided to play it together in January of last year. Thankfully, when we replayed the PS4 version, no such game-breaking glitches occurred. From beginning to end, it was a fantastic thrill ride. I find it interesting that the adventure is equal parts a cautionary tale about the dangers of cults, structural racism, xenophobia, or basically just the horrors of powerful white people, and yet it's telling a pretty down-to-earth story about redemption and saving people you love. The director Ken Levine clearly had some thoughts on society he wanted to express through the game, but he didn't allow them to get in the way of the main plot, meaning that it's a story that anyone can enjoy, while those who look deeper can gain something from it. All the while, the combat is a lot of fun. While world design in the original Bioshock was more refined, I think the linear progression through the story helps the more action-oriented mechanics and tone stand out. This is one of the most unforgettable video game stories I've ever had the pleasure of playing through. Number 3! Why did nobody ever tell me this game was so fun? I love most of the 3D Mario games, but my personal preference is a sandbox-styled collectathon like Mario 64 or Odyssey. The linear entries such as the Galaxy games and 3D Land don't quite hit the spot for me, even though they're very well made and enjoyable. They just don't have quite the same speed or maneuverability to make up for the straightforward levels. But 3D World was a revelation in that regard. This game was so energetic, colorful, and bursting at the seams with creativity that it was just impossible to ignore how full of life it all was. With regards to my personal taste in platformers, this game matched my criteria almost perfectly. I wish it was just slightly tougher, but the fact that the levels were so tightly designed and the characters dashed across the levels with lightning speed made up for the lack of difficulty. So even though it doubles down on being a linear Mario game, the infectious playfulness of the whole thing made me fall in love with it just the same. I got every single green star and sticker, and yes, I even beat Champions Road. And the music is some of the best I've ever heard from this franchise. Oh yeah, and Bowser's Fury was also a ton of fun, even though it just makes me crave after a new, full-fledged game. Hopefully it's a teaser for something grand on the horizon. Honestly, if I didn't play 2 other platformers this year that I enjoyed even more, 3D World plus Bowser's Fury would have been my game of the year. But alas, 2 games surpassed it, the first of which is... Number 2! I literally just posted a review of Metroid Dread, so I'd rather you just go watch that rather than me repeat a lot of the same points. Despite that, I cannot stress enough how happy this game made me. Nintendo has severely ignored Metroid over the past decade or so, which makes the long-rumored Dread out to be a sweet, sweet comeback for this underappreciated series. Go pick this game up if you want a brief but immensely satisfying burst of action platforming. Whether you're a newcomer to Metroid or not, this game is sublime. But even then, it wasn't enough to beat what was ultimately one of my favorite games from the past several years. Ladies and gentlemen, that game happens to be... It's rare that a game comes along with a genuinely great story, but it's even less common when a game has a great story and yet doesn't forget to be, a video game. You know what I mean? Sometimes a game may have an ambitious storyline, and yet the moment-to-moment gameplay will be at odds with the story being presented to you. That's a huge reason why Hades and Celeste are my favorite games from the past few years, because the narrative and gameplay for both titles are so intimately connected that you can't have one without the other. It's also a major reason why It Takes Two takes the top spot for 2021. Much like director Joseph Fares' last game, A Way Out, this game can only be played cooperatively, but for good reason. After all, the player characters are a couple on the verge of divorce, and it's only after a tearful wish from their daughter that their spirits are separated from their bodies, transplanted into two tiny dolls, and then they're forced by a talking anthropomorphic version of a couple's therapy book into working together to solve their problems. Appropriately enough, the person I played through this whole game with was my wife. We may not be having any relationship troubles of our own, but we appreciated the story of Cody and May finding value in their life together nonetheless. It's also great that each and every level of the game is in service of the story at large. Each chapter shakes things up and requires you to learn some wacky new mechanic, the likes of which is symbiotic with what the other player is doing. And what amazed me about this is that for the insane variety of activities you do from one level to the next, not one single level stands out as poorly thought out. The core 3D platforming mechanics are solid enough to where gamers of differing skill level can work at the same pace as the other. My wife may not have particularly cared for the third-person shooting sections, but it was hugely beneficial to our experience that the game wasn't trying to be a serious challenge. It was just difficult enough to where our intelligences weren't being insulted, but that we genuinely had to work together to solve whatever problems the level threw at us. For a game that only takes about 15 hours to beat, there's enough unique and well-executed ideas to fill any mega-budget AAA game 10 times over, and thankfully, none of those ideas were wasted or squandered here. It Takes Two is an artistic triumph, to say the least. If any of you saw the Game Awards and complained that Ratchet & Clank, Deathloop, Metroid, or something else was snubbed for Game of the Year, well, maybe you should actually play It Takes Two and find out why it won. The title came from humbler origins, but has a big heart and should be enjoyed by everyone, adults and kids alike. And that's it! I'm looking forward to 2022 being another interesting year for gaming. You can count on me making another video like this when the time comes. If you liked what you saw and would be inclined to see more of what I have to offer, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining the notification squadron so that you don't miss out on my future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great one.